Hello again, and welcome to Fitness Facts. Dr. Jordan Taylor, the Undergraduate Exercise Science Program Director and Associate Teaching Professor at the University of Kansas. Today we have a special sports science episode. I have Nico Philipp with me in studio to discuss some interesting research that he has conducted here at the University of Kansas specific to the sport of American football. Nico was born and raised in Nuremberg, Germany, and moved to the United States in 2017. He completed bachelor's and master's degrees in kinesiology at the University of Central Missouri, and he's also a certified strength and conditioning specialist and certified personal trainer. His work focused on strength and conditioning and sports science research during his years at the University of Central Missouri. Nico started his Ph.D. in exercise physiology at the University of Kansas in the fall 2021 semester, and he currently is a member of the research team in the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab. His primary research interests are applied neuromuscular performance testing and monitoring in athletes, deceleration and change of direction, as well as identification of sport-specific key performance indicators to enhance decision-making for strength and conditioning coaches. For example, coaches and athletes may wonder how strong is strong enough with regard to developing speed. Welcome to the show, Nico.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so in the introduction there, I mentioned what your primary research interests are. Can you provide more detail about what exactly you're interested in researching and the studies you have conducted and published or that are in review? I know there's one in review right now.
Yeah.
And then what got you interested in conducting research in your area?
Yeah, I'll kind of start with the last thing you said just to kind of lay a foundation. Coming over here to the United States in 2017, I had a pretty big interest in strength and conditioning. I knew I wanted to get some hands-on experience. So right off the bat, during my undergrad at Central Missouri, I reached out to the department there, was a kind of like a volunteer strength and conditioning coach all throughout undergrad, and kind of like as that journey progressed, also got involved in the kinesiology exercise science lab on campus, which I also found to be very interesting, and then just kind of organically wanted to merge the two so I can how can I incorporate the science and the research into the strength and conditioning setting to help athletes avoid injury, perform at their best, all the goals that we have kind of within this space.
Did you have a background, just out of curiosity, like in athletics growing up in Germany?
Yeah.
Did you participate in any sports?
Yeah, so if I stood up, you'd probably call me crazy, but I played basketball. Not very tall, but I played point guard about my entire life. So set up a little bit different in Germany. We have club sports instead of like going through kind of like educational institutions like high school, college here. But yeah, from about 8 years old all the way up to when I moved here to the States, I played pretty high level basketball over in Germany.
All right. So a lot of people that are, exercise science students or that go into this type of research, they were former athletes. So that's what I wanted to ask. And now a lot of your research obviously is focused on, studying basketball players, football players. Yeah. Were you familiar with the sport of American football? It's growing worldwide, obviously. What was your experience there with that, prior to coming here and really working with like the football team at University of Central Missouri and some of the studies you've done?
Yeah, so like you said, it is definitely growing internationally. One thing that I'll kind of highlight is that between coming to the United States in 2017, prior to that, I'd spent a year in Kansas City kind of like as part of like a high school foreign exchange experience. So I was at a high school in Kansas City. That's kind of like 16 years old, my first experience like living here, being exposed to some different American sports. And yeah, kind of prior to that, I've known about football, and then that's kind of when I've gotten more interested. Obviously had interest all the way throughout, wrapping up my schooling in Germany, and then getting to the US in 2017, that was definitely one of the sports that I was most interested in, kind of like in addition to basketball. And then being at a Division II school, you just naturally don't have the amount of manpower and strength and conditioning that you might have at a Power 5 school. So anything that has to do with football, like an 80 to 100 player roster, is kind of a all hands on deck mission in Division II. So even though I did work with men's and women's basketball at Central Missouri, football was just kind of the primary focus because that's kind of the money maker, and that's kind of what all coaches to some extent are involved in.
Yeah, I remember when they had the NFL Europe over there, and which is now defunct, that league. But some of the guys I played arena football with back in the day that played over there, had a buddy that played with the Rhine Fire, and then came back here and was with the Chiefs for a little bit and Patriots, and then ended up coming back down to the arena level. But I know fans over there tend to really seem to latch on to the American game. And
the Chiefs are playing the Dolphins this year in Germany.
Yep, so. And now the NFL is having a lot of international games, Mexico, Europe. So it's growing. So I was just curious at your background there with it. But maybe kind of talk about now more about what your primary research interests are. You know, what are you looking at here in the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab? What have you looked at with your time, like working on your master's at University of Central Missouri? Mm-hmm. The Mules, the University of Central Missouri Mules.
Mules and Jennies.
Yep. So it is the Mules, right? Or is it the Jennies?
Well, there's no such thing as a female mule. So
I guess that's right.
The women's teams are the Jennies.
Right.
And the male teams are the mules.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So talk about a little bit about your research there at Central Missouri and here.
Yeah. So I'd say largely on like a very large scale, all those different research interests are kind of intercorrelated to some extent, but I'd say there was a big focus that I did in my master's and undergrad at Central Missouri that was kind of like around the topic of between leg differences, interlimb asymmetry, specifically with regards to strength and force generation, and kind of how that influences some outcome measures such as change of direction performance, and then how can we measure asymmetry? How can we define what a meaningful asymmetry potentially is? And then also ballparking some ideas for how these may be addressed within a training setting. So that was kind of my first focus.
Now you're making me think of questions. Now, it's funny because I had Dr. Dan Lorenz, who's a physical therapist, in not too long ago when we talked about shoulder joint injuries and glenohumeral internal rotation deficit. And it's like, in some cases, asymmetry may be it may not be a problem, you know what I mean? So just because you have asymmetry, it may not necessarily be an issue. Yeah. Are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, no, totally. So that's kind of the conclusion that I ended up coming towards, over the course.
It's like a functional adaptation in some athletes.
Over the course of those 3 studies that I conducted, I mean, there are certain number of steps and factors that we like to go through to identify whether or not that asymmetry might potentially be meaningful from a performance or injury standpoint. But yes, asymmetries are completely normal. I mean, humans are not machines,
right.
Especially if you are in a sport where there are certain movement patterns that are very specific, like a right-handed pitcher will probably have a very heavy asymmetry favoring one side over the other. A soccer player that's a right wing or a wide receiver that's primarily playing left of the quarterback instead of right of the quarterback. So there are a few things like that can certainly contribute to some of those asymmetry naturally occurring. And
it's just a functional adaptation.
Yeah, just because they're there doesn't mean they'll all automatically become a problem. Huh?
Now, did you actually? We're kind of going on a whole tangent here, which is this always happens when I do interviews, but or discussions. So, did you ever identify like points where the asymmetry actually became a risk? Maybe a risk of injury, or did you? Was that not where the research went?
Looking through it from an injury perspective is kind of tricky because you have to track injury and things like that. It was not the primary focus. We primarily looked at through like a performance lens.
Okay.
And historically, people have thrown out thresholds like 10%, 15%. In one of our follow-up studies, we found by using some similar to what we'll talk about later, receiver operator curves, we identified a 15% threshold in between leg strength within the Bulgarian split squat to be associated with slower performance in the L drill, which is a change of direction performance drill. However, asymmetry is such a task and modality specific phenomenon, even metric specific, that this threshold that we identified likely only holds true for our population for the test that we used, because if you do a different test, your asymmetry might look completely different. Is it still favoring one leg over the other? So it's just a very specific topic to where you cannot make absolute statements like anything over 10 or 15% will be automatically leading to performance decrements or injury problems.
Right, okay. Any other research you want to highlight that you've
so
currently conducting? Or
kind of like I said, while they're all correlated in some capacity, I kind of grab from those 3 different buckets that I'm interested in. A lot of it is kind of that neuromuscular performance monitoring, very applied, what are some field tests using force plates, things like that we can utilize to monitor athletes' progress over time, to monitor their fatigue during stressful phases of training, identifying metrics that might be more sensitive over others. That's kind of one of these buckets, and then doing that over longitudinal periods of times in pretty high-level athletes. One that's kind of emerged over the last year or 2 is looking into deceleration performance. Okay, so there's a lot of research obviously out there on how do athletes get up to speed, how fast can they run, how fast can they get to top speed, things like that. But unless you are a track sprinter, you're going to have to be pretty efficient at slowing down as well to either, evade a defender, make space for yourself, especially in those field and court-based sports that we have. So some investigations into how can we quantify deceleration performance, what does it mean, what are correlations between other measures like strength, force generation, things like that. So that's kind of been a big interest of mine recently as well. And then lastly, and this will be probably, go ahead.
You said I just think of, it sounds funny, but the more rapidly you can decelerate, you hear coaches always say stop on a dime, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the more rapidly you can do that, overcome your momentum, overcome your body's inertia to change your direction, the more likely you're going to be to, get by that defender and carry the ball to the end zone, or explode by somebody on the soccer field or basketball court. And it is such an overlooked thing, the deceleration training.
It's got huge implications from an injury perspective too, because a lot of those ACL type injuries happen during very high decelerative impacts, and
deceleration and changing direction.
And they're correlated with each other so heavily. So and then lastly, that's kind of, I think, what the bulk of our discussion is going to be about. And a lot of that is based on some of the work that I also did at Central Missouri, and some of the data that I still have from Central Missouri is kind of identifying some key performance indicators, especially within the sport of football from a physical performance perspective. So what are some measures of physical performance that we can quantify? How do they actually relate to some more sport-specific measures of success? And then also grabbing some of those key performance indicators, like, for example, linear speed, and investigating how an athlete's strength and improvements over time in strength might influence their speed performance or their sprint performance.
All right, good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the game demands in American football and physical performance testing in particular. So we know, football players need to show proficiency in a variety of different physical abilities, obviously upper and lower body strength, power production, being able to rapidly accelerate and decelerate, need to be efficient at changing direction. So agility, change of direction, overcoming your body's inertia, attaining high running speeds, obviously some, muscular endurance in there as well. And a lot of this is position specific. Of course, the demands for a defensive back or a wide receiver are going to be different than, say, an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. And we'll talk, I know, more about this as we go. So there's a lot of specificity there with just positions. And if we talk about some of the ways that these physical abilities are tested, we talk about off-season testing batteries that are commonly used by strength and conditioning coaches, in high school and collegiate programs. At the professional level, they use a lot of these testing batteries, these tests at the NFL Combine for collegiate athletes that are invited there that are looking to get, drafted into the NFL, on pro days. collegiate athletes will participate in a lot of these tests. So, obviously the performance of players in these tests is important to, coaches, team personnel, management, scouts. It can really affect how you perform in these physical tests, your draft stock. So let's kind of look at some of these testing batteries and what's actually tested. Maybe run through some of these, because I know this is tied in with your research.
Yeah. So just, I guess one thing that we should mention first is that obviously there is a big discussion kind of around these tests, how well do those tests correlate to actual success within that sport? I know there's
a huge debate.
There's a handful of research out there is, okay, how well do the NFL combine tests actually correlate with success later down the road? And it seems that it's actually not all that great, but that's not kind of the purpose of this talk here. I think a lot of those tests are commonly implemented just because they kind of trickle down from the NFL level. Go ahead.
And no, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just thinking and people get stuck in the way of doing things, and not being open to change. But a lot of times, at the NFL Combine and Pro Days, they just want to see how the athletes are moving, and you can get a general idea from the test. But I know there's a huge debate on, should we really be testing these things? Should we change things? Do some of these performance tests?
I mean, you could make for example, you probably never get up to speed, like this type of speed that you'd hit in a 40-yard dash in most of the scenarios in a football game, but your 0 to 10-yard performance is so highly correlated with your 40-yard dash performance that it doesn't make that test irrelevant. We could probably argue that the 225 max bench press test probably doesn't correlate as well to some sport-specific performance markers. But, I think commonly, obviously, tests that are implemented at the NFL Combine and that, for instance, with us at Central Missouri that we saw and that I think are pretty common across the country are things like the 40-yard dash, obviously, the pro agility, so a kind of change of direction test.
So 40-yard dash, and basically, and they're going to do 10 and 20-yard splits to look at initial acceleration and then over the 40 yards. And one of the things with the 40 is people always, I get students that ask the question, or people wonder, well, why is the 40 tested? And well, originally, this is the thinking, is that the average punt goes about 40 yards, and on a punt formation, you have gunners that are lined up on the outside, and these are usually your faster receivers or defensive backs. And their goal as a gunner is to, when that ball is kicked, get down there and cover the returner that's going to be returning the ball. And so average punt goes maybe 40 yards. It has a hang time of maybe 4.5 seconds. So generally you would want those gunners, if they're going to arrive at the same time the ball arrives to the kick returner, you want them to run around at least a 4.5 in hopes that they're going to meet the returner right when he's catching the ball. And so that way he can't return it for any significant yardage. So that's one of the reasons they've historically used.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that. Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that.
That's one of the reasons. Because, it's like, well, why not a 50 or why not a 60? But, the average hang time of a punt, 4.5 seconds or so. Those gunners are going down to cover. Average punt's 40 yards. So that's why they've kind of always looked at that. But still, it's and I've been a gunner before. So you may be getting double teamed. You've got a defender right in front of you, a couple yards across from you. So it's not like it's just this linear release downfield, like out of a 3-point stance where you're running for. I mean, you've got to use some agility side to side, fight through, use your hands, and then get around that defender. So even that is not, perfectly linear. But anyway, and then so we talk about the pro agility. So what's this next assessment? What are we looking at here with the pro agility?
Yeah, so pro agility is essentially just a change of direction test in which the athletes are asked to essentially perform some linear accelerations and essentially 2 180-degree turns, so to assess their ability of how well can they, slow down and then come back fast out of that cut.
Right.
So it's a measure of change of direction ability.
Overcoming your body's inertia. That's how I like to think of agility. So just to show, I got some props here, right? I only got 3 pennies. This isn't going to get us much dinner later with 3 pennies, but this is just to show what the pro agility is for people that may not know what this performance test is. Like I said, you'll see this done at the NFL Combine, on the pro day for athletes. I mean, I was tested, I remember, in community college, and when I played arena football, they had us run through this pro agility. You may hear it referred to as the 5-10-5 shuttle or the 20-yard shuttle because you're covering a total distance of 20 yards. So we got 3 cones here, which are my pennies, and they're 5 yards apart. Okay, so the athlete's going to start in the middle, 3-point stance. On their movement, the timer's going to start. So they'll go to the right, touch with their outside hand and foot on the line, come back 10 yards to the left cone, touch outside hand and foot on the line, and then return to the middle. So it's 5, 10, 5, and that time is, the time is kept when they cross the line. So it's typically, I can think there's a few, receivers that are people with really good agility, maybe sub 4 seconds in that, 3.99, 3.98, 3.97 if they're really, really, really agile and can really change direction well. But then maybe talk about the L drill.
Yeah, so L drill also meant to measure change of direction ability. In this one, the athlete is kind of asked to cut through an L shape. So besides the 180-degree turns, you have some sharper, or not sharper, less sharp 90-degree cuts here in the L drill.
Right, and just to show the L drill, so we got our 3 cones and a L here. Athlete's going to start this first cone. Again, typically 3-point stance, 5 yards this way, touch the line, come back 5 yards this way, touch the line. Then they're going to sprint, accelerate around this cone, and then they come inside this cone that's at the top here, circle around it. You want to stay tight to the cone, drop your hips, right? Stay low to the ground. And then they come all the way back around to the start, right? So it's 5, 10, 5 around the cone, around the inside, and then they loop all the way back around to the start. Yeah. Hopefully, I just wanted to demonstrate so people can understand. So I didn't have a picture to put up on the screen.
So
and typically I'm trying to think 6 to 8 seconds somewhere. That's a typical range.
your skill position players are going to be in the higher 6s, and then probably mids, bigs, a little bit above 7. I'd say some pretty normal numbers.
So you typically see, like you said, mid to high 6s with your receivers, your DBs, those guys, and big linemen, maybe not quite as they have a lot of inertia, momentum
to carry more body weight with you.
And then of course, I'll let you go through, maybe just explain the rest of these tests, what we're looking at, why they're done. Maybe that's the big thing, is just to let people know, why are these being tested?
Yeah, so the 3 that we covered, in addition to that, we have usually the broad jump. Broad jump measures explosive force expression in the horizontal manner. So essentially you use a counter movement to propel yourself forward as far as you can. So that's a good indicator in some capacity of, maybe something like a explosive first step, early acceleration in a sprint. So that's just how well can the athlete express force in a horizontal manner.
Right. It's like they do well in the broad jump. They're probably, you would think they're going to be good exploding right off the line.
Yeah, so there's some pretty good correlations established there between some short sprint times and the broad jump. And then the counterpart to that, just the vertical jump. We know there's a ton of different ways of measuring the vertical jump, whether that's on a force plate, jump mat, vertec, but the vertical jump, just kind of testing lower body vertical power production, force generation in the vertical plane. And so that just being tested for those reasons.
Yeah.
And then
I think, and pretty much for your collegiate athlete and above, well, depending on position, I'm always thinking, because, I've had these tested, so I'm familiar with, as a former slot receiver, what good values are for receivers and DBs, but typically they want 36 inches and up.
Yeah.
So you start getting up to 38, 40 inches, that's above. Some NFL athletes, receivers and DBs will be even jumping above 40 inches, but those are kind of typical, just to give people a feel for typical numbers.
I guess the last 2 that'll be of interest here, I guess, to our study that we'll highlight, but they're not being measured as part of the NFL Combine, are just some different weight room-based strength and power assessments, like 1RM in the back squat, for example, or like a 3 repetition maximum in the back squat. Same thing for upper body strength, like the bench press, and then we can look at some Olympic weightlifting type derivatives, such as the hang clean, for example, or the power clean, things like that.
Hang clean, looking at your power production. So
Yep.
All right. Well, kind of the next question that ties into this would be do the performance testing, these batteries that we just talked about, does it actually help to predict which athletes will be successful on the field at the collegiate or professional level? And we talked a little bit about this, maybe previous research studies.
Yeah.
I mean, is there, off the top of your head, much of a correlation between the performance in these and their on-field performance?
That's obviously the one thing that you want to find out, because if those tests that you're not doing, they're not correlating to the outcome that you want to achieve, then why are you doing them in the first place? There's a handful of studies done with regards to some of these NFL combine tests and trying to predict how well an athlete's going to do later down the road in the NFL, and they're actually not all that great. So they're not very predictive of how well they're going to perform down the road. Part of that might be that you're kind of the creme de la creme, like you have the best athletes in the world. They're all going to be fast. They're all going to be strong. Yeah. They're all going to be able to jump well. So it might be some other things that distinguish them at that level. But yeah, just those traditional tests that we've talked about, I don't think and I might be butchering some here, and there might have been new stuff coming out, but just some of the stuff that I've seen, it's not all that great at predicting future success.
Right. Yeah. Look at Tom Brady. Well, he's a quarterback
exactly.
Too,
you talk about quarterbacks, a little different.
Yeah, a little different. And I know it's a great point when you said the creme de la creme, and they're all fast. They can all move. They can all change direction. I mean, they wouldn't be playing in the NFL if they weren't. And I even know it at lower professional levels. Like, I mean, when I was playing arena football, we had a lot of guys that had been on an NFL roster. Maybe were that close to making it. Maybe had been in some training camps on the preseason roster, had come back down, maybe had an injury. But even those guys, I learned real quick. I was like, it's not what you can do. Everybody can do what you can do. It's the one thing you don't do well.
Yeah.
Or, maybe this receiver catches 9 out of 10 balls and you catch 8 out of 10. Well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, even though that's just, you think, well, that's just a one drop difference. Well, it doesn't matter. He's catching 90%. You're catching 80. That's an issue. Or, you're talking tenths of a second. We had my coach Cortez, love him, Italian guy. He coached at Fort Hays State, and I think it was Mesa State, and coached a bunch of different arena teams down in Oklahoma and Grand Rapids Rampage. Coached in Wichita when I was there with the Stealth. And I remember he said at this tryout I was invited to, he was like, if you guys, and we had like 100 players there trying to make the roster, and there was already, they already had players on the roster, so we just needed to pick up a few players. And he's like, if you're not running a 4.5 or below as a receiver, he's like, I'm probably not going to be interested in you. I mean, he just was that blunt about it. Like 4.5 second or below, probably not going to make it.
Yeah.
But luckily I did.
Luckily you did.
I had a good day that day. But it's just interesting because at that level, it's not what everybody is. They can do what you can do. I mean, it's you're right. All right, so let's talk about this paper that you published recently in 2022 in the International Journal of Strength and Conditioning, titled "A Total Score of Athleticism to Estimate the Amount of Variance Explained in On-Field Performance Within Collegiate American Football Players."
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. There's a lot there. So maybe just what is a total score of athleticism, and why might it be a useful tool for coaches, athletes, and other team personnel, and even sports scientists?
Yeah, so kind of like the name says, and this was based out of a paper that came out of the UK. I want to say it was Turner et al. That proposed the idea. I think it
was. I remember reading it.
Proposed the idea of that total score of athleticism, essentially grabbing a handful of physical qualities, let's say speed, change of direction ability, power, endurance, and just kind of converting them to z-scores and just making one overarching score that reflects overall athletic performance. So that's kind of what the TSA, or the total score of athleticism, here refers to.
Right, because you're testing the different domains of athleticism, but like you said, if it's a z-score, a standardized score, then it's this one value reflective of the athlete's ability.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously a great idea, but then the next question would be, what type of assessments do we incorporate into that TSA? Because if there are assessments that essentially don't correlate with our outcome, which is performing well on the court, on the pitch, whatever that may be, and winning games, then again, why are we doing them?
Right. The tests, they need to be valid and reliable.
Yeah, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
And so, I guess kind of like the crux of that study was we had some data of kind of Division II football players over a number of years. Those performance tests that were performed in the offseason that we've talked about, anything from like our 40-yard dash, L-drill, pro agility, vertical jump, broad jump. We had some weight room-based strength assessments, and kind of just doing the same that I said for the TSA, but kind of for on-field performance. So identifying by talking to the coaches, what are some statistics that matter to this position group. For a wide receiver, that may be your catches over the season, or yards per catch, or a DB tackles made, interceptions, whatever that may be. So identifying what those important factors for on-field success are, and then also standardizing them and turning them into like a position-specific, overarching total score of on-field success to kind of have that as the outcome. Okay, now we can start to correlate some of these physical performance markers to our total score of on-field success to identify which of those might matter and which might not matter.
Right. And maybe we can pull up that picture 3. So here you have these two tables. You mentioned some of when you went to the coaches and you're like, coaches, what are you interested in? And what? So you've got this, table 4 there in the red box, total score of performance.
Yeah.
This is obviously, in game, these are statistics that are tracked, like you said, your receivers, average yards per catch, receiving yards per game. You're looking at position-specific statistics here.
Yeah.
Running back, all-purpose yards, their rushing yards, their receiving yards, rushing yards per game, defensive back tackles per game, pass breakups, interceptions, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll kind of let you take it from there, because I kind of cut you off. But I just wanted to get this image up so everybody could see kind of, what you were doing here with your purpose of this study.
Yeah, so essentially we generated these TSPs, total scores of on-field success or on-field performance, to have as our kind of our dependent variable, if we're talking in statistical terms here.
So that's your outcome.
Yeah,
for people
that's
that
our
dependent
outcome.
variable is your outcome, right?
And then our independent variables would be those measures of physical performance, like the 40-yard dash, the L-drill, the broad jump. And so now
everything in table 1. Yeah.
Yes.
So you're trying to see if table 1 variables, the 40, the pro agility, all those, predict
correct
what's going on with each position group in table 4, right? Does pro agility time predict maybe running back rushing yards per game, all-purpose yards, average yards per rush, things like that? Or maybe it's tied in more to the 40, or maybe I think 40 times maybe in some previous research have been tied into running backs typically having a longer run, the longest run of the season, so
which makes sense.
They're long, But
yeah, so by kind of going not into too much detail with the statistics, but we took an approach in which we used some backward model regression, I think. So essentially wanting to predict our outcome, which was the TSP, by throwing all of our physical performance markers into the mix and seeing which combination of those assessments has the highest predictive ability or the highest ability to estimate the largest amount of variance that's explained in our outcome variable. And so that was kind of the crux of our aim here, is to see, can we identify a total score of athleticism based on those physical performance markers that can potentially predict the TSP, which is our measures of on-field success, which are identified here in Table 4.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was an interesting analysis. Some numbers shook out that were like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. If you just look at it, there was some other stuff.
The next picture 4, I guess you're kind of getting into the results here.
Yeah. do you want me to touch on anything else?
I'm trying to think, maybe before we get into this table, like the methods you use. So you looked at different positions. Maybe talk about the athletes again that were involved. This was at Central Missouri.
Yeah, these were Division II football players. I think we had a total sample size of maybe a little bit over 100, then split them up into running backs was one group, defensive backs was one group, and
receivers,
tight ends were one group, and then we had linebackers and defensive line. Reason why we excluded offensive linemen is because it's kind of hard to quantify their performance from an on-field perspective, especially at the Division II level. Those are kind of the guys.
There's no real statistics.
Yeah, those are kind of the guys that do
maybe pancake blocks.
Yeah,
but
they do the most work, but there's not really like a statistic, or at least that we had, that we thought was good enough to include. So,
and if you're a quarterback or skill position player, always give your offensive lineman love.
Yep.
And food. Lots of food.
Yeah, they need that.
They need love and food.
Yeah. And then QBs were just excluded because sample size was just too small. I think we had 3 QBs on the roster, and from a statistical standpoint, that just poses some challenges. Right. So yeah, that was kind of the breakdown of the positions. And if you go through the paper, you can see how many players were in each position. For example, we had I think 29 wide receivers and tight ends, 8 running backs, I think 40 something linebackers and defensive linemen. So that'll be in the paper.
All right, so let's look at now the results here, getting into these different tables of this first research study. And can you explain this table? And for people that aren't very keen or maybe in simple terms, some of the statistics here. Can you break down what all this means so that in a practical manner, so that coaches, players can make sense of this?
Yeah. So I guess from a practical standpoint, I wouldn't worry about the numbers here too much, especially, for example, if you look at that first column, which is the estimate column, usually that estimate column shows that, okay, if we have a 1 unit increase in our independent variable, or we have a 0.215 if we look at the Hanklin increase in our independent variable, other way around, if we have a 1 point or 1 score increase in our independent variable, that'll lead to a 0.215 increase in our dependent variable. But since these are all z-scores and the TSP is just a bunch of scores mixed together, that doesn't really carry a lot of practical significance to where we can say, okay, if your squat improves by 20 pounds, that'll lead to a this or that in the dependent variable. So I guess just looking at what the measures are that are highlighted on the left-hand side, because those are the ones that shook out to be the best predictors for that outcome that we're looking at.
Again, this is wide receivers and tight ends, right? So we're looking at, again, this is position specific.
Yes. And so without going into too much stats here, but anything p-value under 0.05, we can say there is a statistically significant effect between dependent and independent variable. The t-value here just kind of showing the magnitude and the direction of the effect in some manner. So we can see, for example, here in the wide receiver tight end group, the broad jump seemed to have the highest predictive ability.
Yeah, and I should have highlighted that, because that p-value is 0.013 for the broad jump. So, again, explain what that means just in simple terms. Broad jump, that's one of in the previous table we looked at, that's part of the physical battery test, the off-season testing. So what does that mean with the broad jump for wide receivers and tight ends?
Yeah, that just means that within this model that was identified, that was the independent variable or the physical performance marker that seemed to have the highest contribution to that model or the highest predictive ability within that model, which means those athletes that can generate a lot of force in the horizontal manner and produce power in a horizontal manner, they seem to have been those athletes that had higher scores within that total score of on-field performance. So those would be your higher performers. And then, interestingly, also under 0.05 was the bench press. But if we look at the direction of that effect, there's a negative sign, meaning...
By the estimate, negative 0.598.
Meaning that those athletes that benched more performed worse in the total score of on-field performance. So arguably your bench press is probably going to be related to your body weight in some capacity, your body weight probably related to your broad jump or your speed in some capacity. So maybe those were some of the the heavier tight ends or your heavier wide receivers.
That maybe didn't have the breakaway long catch and run, or they didn't have as many, yards per reception, or
which is interesting, because then we still, the 220 or 225 pound bench press at the combine, we're not doing that for like strength. It's just how many reps can you knock out. But then it just kind of shows you again it's
more of a muscular endurance test.
What's the predictive ability of that. But yeah, so that's kind of that model for the wide receiver and tight ends. I think one model that I thought was interesting was the one for the linebackers and D-line. If you want to skip over, did you want me to highlight?
Well, and then before we go to that one, so I have highlighted there in yellow. So when he's talking about these models, and he's mentioned regression equations. Regression equations are used to predict something. Like I said, we're trying to predict on-field performance from the off-season testing battery, the broad jump, the L drill, the 40, trying to predict how they perform in that, how it will translate or correlate to on-field performance. But this that's in yellow highlighted here, you can see there's a lot that goes into this equation. It's complex. It's not just, so you're looking at the athlete's Z-score in the broad jump, the Z-score in the bench press. This is all put into this equation, the Z-score for their hang clean and their L drill. And I mean, that's all factored in to try to predict on-field performance.
Yeah, and then essentially what we found was that in most cases that predictive model was pretty highly correlated with the actual score for on-field performance, which showed us that, okay, this model that we identified here has some relevance with regards to how well it can predict that total score of on-field performance.
If you want to skip ahead to the next picture, we can talk about, this is the one you were wanting to get into with the running backs.
I can. I thought the D-line and linebacker one's the most interesting in my opinion. That's picture 7, but I can touch on
anything you want to talk about with running backs. I figure if we just go each position.
Yeah, running backs, obviously smaller sample size, only 8 guys in there, so that obviously carries some limitations. This model was not found to be significant, but still explained a decent amount of variance in our outcome here. If we kind of look at the t-values here, so for these guys here, the 40-yard dash for the running back seemed to carry the most relevance as far as them being successful on the field goes. So that's kind of the model here for the running backs.
It's interesting going back to the receivers that 40 wasn't on there. That's such a big thing. Coaches and scouts and they key in on is 40 times for receivers. It's interesting that wasn't part of the model here for the receivers and tight ends. But you see that biggest effect on the broad jump for the receivers and tight ends.
And that's the thing when you work with applied data like that, with smaller sample size, even though 29 wide receivers is a pretty good sample size for the type of research that we're doing. It could have been skewed. We might, over the course of that study duration, we might have had 2 receivers that were outliers that were super good on the field, but they weren't just not that fast, which might have skewed that relationship. But, taking that with a grain of salt based on the sample size. But yeah, I agree. It's interesting
it'd be interesting to look
out.
10-yard sprint times, because too, especially your ability to separate right off the line, like if you're getting pressed as a receiver, or if you're a slot receiver working over the middle or in the middle of the field. You've got to be able to separate quickly, and that would be interesting. There's just so many things to look at. It's very complex, as you can see here with this data.
It gets complex.
All right, so you want to go then to the next picture. So we're on picture 6 here?
Yeah,
this is table 7. So now we're looking at
that's DBs, I think.
DBs, or were you wanting to go back? Which one were you wanting to look at?
I was thinking picture 7, the linebackers and D-line, because that's the one that shook out to be the most significant model. And it was one of the ones where it was interesting to see the correlation between some of those markers, because the one physical performance marker that shook out the most was the hang clean, which is kind of like your explosive hip drive, right? Powerful, which if you think about the nature of the position, like a linebacker or a defensive lineman, they have to have that quick first step horizontal power production, like coming through the offensive line or coming around the offensive line.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting one.
And hang clean, you see that the ZHC, so that's the Z-score for the hang clean there, and that p-value is less than 0.001, so that's significant. And if you think about the hang clean, what you're doing is you're loading and training triple extension. So, you're loading and training that extension of the hips, extension of the knee, extension of the ankle, which is obviously, if you think about sprinting, coming around the edge, if you're defensive end, linebacker exploding maybe through the A gap, and you're going to need that powerful triple extension of the hips, knee, and ankle. So,
I guess. And then the second one was the L drill, which just kind of like our coaches really like that one, just historically speaking, without going into actual numbers or research. They always thought that was an important one for those position groups, which finding that within that model kind of reaffirmed their prior beliefs, which that's obviously one where you have change of direction, which can be of importance, again, for someone like a linebacker.
Especially I think if DN's coming off the edge, they're trying to get around that offensive tackle, and they're running kind of in a curvilinear fashion back to the quarterback.
Like the end of the L drill.
So that L drill, like the end of the L drill, when you're having to round around those cones, I mean, it is kind of... That makes sense that it would be a good predictor there.
Yeah,
the L drill for the linebackers and D linemen.
And just looking at the P and T value of the overall model, I mean, that was the one that had the highest predictive ability and was also the best sample size. I mean, we had 41 athletes in that group, so that's probably one of the ones that we could be more confident in.
So you would tell a coach with your linebackers and D linemen, focus on maybe the L drill more.
Focus on the L drill and the hang clean. Yeah, those are the two that I'd say.
Let's go back just to the DBs, just so we cover each position looked at. So table 7, looking at defensive backs here. Anything? Well, I guess we got the p value there for the squat at
that was interesting.
0.043. The Z-score for the squat. Yeah, maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so the overall model performance wasn't great, but the squat or the Z-score for the squat shook out to be a good predictor within that model, I guess. But yeah, it seems that those defensive backs that were stronger seemed to perform better on the field within our sample, at least within the back squat here. And obviously some of those measures that were part of that total score of on-field performance were sacks, were
pass
breakups, were things like quarterback hurries, were things like tackles, and those obviously all rely on strength to a certain extent. So that was one that shook out. But interestingly, not the 40, not the vert, not the L drill. They were included in the overall model, but they weren't great predictors here.
Yeah, and I think I had highlighted, I think with DBs, maybe it was, and this is in other studies, but looking at DBs and their times in, so it was LaPlaca and colleagues found that those cornerbacks, which cornerback is a defensive back, with faster 40-yard dash times at the NFL Combine had a higher number of pass breakups per pass coverage snap count, as well as games played in the NFL. Free safeties, another defensive back with better performance in the vertical jump, had more tackles per total snap count, and strong safeties with faster times in the L drill had more interceptions per pass coverage snap count. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's obviously that's a limitation of the paper, just based on sample size. We had to bunch some of those position groups together.
Yeah.
In a perfect world with a sufficient sample size, you'd look at the cornerbacks individually, you'd look at the safeties individually. You wouldn't look at the linebackers and the defensive linemen as part of the same group. So that's just kind of a limitation of the study. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. Anything else you want to discuss before we go on to, let's see, what picture are we on here? So we talked about D linemen. I mean, I guess.
Well, along those lines of body weight differences and things like that. That's kind of a good transition into the next piece here. And how does strength change over time in some of these athletes?
Well, maybe we summarize before we get into this next study by Mann and colleagues. But from this first study that you did that we just talked about, looking at all this data, kind of what conclusions did you draw from the research? And we talked a bit there already about what physical qualities translate or may be more likely to translate to performance on field for the different position groups, the receivers, tight ends, running backs, DBs, linebackers, and D linemen. But based on the conclusions you drew from this research, if you had a coach or a player or scout come to you, team personnel, management, a collegiate or professional team, what are you going to tell them? Like, what are the nuggets from this research, this first study, that you can give them to help them with decision making as far as their athletes?
I mean, just based on these results, I'd highlight the test for the specific position groups that were identified as far as evaluation tools goes. But a kind of overarching picture, I'd just emphasize the need for an individual approach for an identification of those tests, which ones matter, and kind of how using certain tests for all athlete groups without taking that individual approach can be short-sighted or even misleading, and just kind of that individualized need of, which physical performance qualities relate to success within this position group, because the same physical performance qualities that relate to success in that position group will probably not also relate to this position group, so bunching them all together could be misleading. So that's probably a big takeaway, is that approach to testing, but also training, should be very individualized.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Anything else you want to mention with that study before we kind of move into talking about Dr. Mann's research and kind of how some of that research is linked to what you're doing?
I think I'm good on that one. Yeah, we can move on.
All right. So Dr. Brian Mann, so he's down at University of Miami, I believe still. He published a paper in 2022 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research titled "Momentum Rather Than Velocity is a More Effective Measure of Improvements in Division I Football Player Performance." And in that, Dr. Mann explained that there's a common trend in which collegiate football players continue to make gains in body mass throughout their collegiate career that are not accompanied by improvements in speed across their collegiate career. But he suggested that coaches and researchers should take into consideration these increases in body mass by also looking at momentum, which momentum is a product of mass times velocity, all right, just to break it down. So only looking at sprint velocity or sprint completion times may provide an incomplete picture of the improvements made by athletes over their collegiate careers. That's coming from Dr. Mann. Do you agree with that sentiment? And then kind of how is his research kind of tied in with what you're doing here at KU?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And that study was published around the same time that I was looking at some similar data with our football data set here. And, linear speed just being one of those overarching key performance indicators that coaches like to look at. Obviously, it's the focus of a lot of training programs. How can we get a guy year one and make him faster by the time he's a senior? Things like that. So longitudinal analyses like the one that Dr. Mann showed, and even some of the ones that were highlighted in my studies, were that there's a pretty common trend that, athletes in a collegiate setting in football get on campus as freshmen, and then over the course of their career, so across 3 years, 4 years, they make significant improvements in strength and gain significant amounts of weights, but those are not always accompanied by improvements in speed, probably influenced by the body mass gain. So he just kind of proposes, well, since football is a contact sport, should we not only look at linear speed, but also momentum? And is that speed, just looking at speed, masking some things?
Yeah, and that momentum is such a big thing, especially I think of, well, depending on the position, and then also how the player plays that position.
Yeah.
If you're a bigger running back, but you're fast, you may want to use momentum to your advantage, mass times velocity, to run somebody over.
Yeah.
If you're a smaller, quicker, little slot receiver that's maybe not as strong, but you're lightning quick, well, then you may not be trying to utilize your mass and the speed at which you can move your body to run somebody over. You're going to be more using your agility and things like that. So, or maybe it's a defensive back, trying to, tackle. Obviously, the momentum and force is mass times acceleration that you can produce to tackle somebody. That's going to be an advantage in getting like a bigger receiver down.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is, the characteristics of the player, the position, like we've talked about, how their style of play, because you can have different styles of play at different positions.
So I guess there's not one better than the other. It just kind of depends, like with so much in our field of what you're looking at.
But I think it's important, like Dr. Rand said. I mean, that should be something that's looked at more often. Momentum. I mean, that is coaches just are so. They just key in so much on the 40 and a lot of those tests that we talked about that are done at the combine or a pro day or off-season testing. I mean, it's one of those things they've always been done, But I can definitely think, as just a personal anecdote, I remember my freshman year of junior college football, and I was light. I mean, I was only like 145 pounds.
Yeah.
Now I was fast, and I remember being timed at a 4.45 and a 4.4640, which is good as a freshman in college. And then I got up to, off-season weights program, get up to 150, 155. By the time I was playing arena football early in mid-2000s, I'd get up to like 175 in the off-season and then drop down. I felt fastest and most agile at about 165, my weight. But even weighing more, and I'd get up to 170, 175 and then drop down to 165. Compared to what I weighed in junior college, I was faster in junior college. Yeah. And so I was running 4.4 in JUCO, and then arena football was like low 4.5s, like 4.5 flat, 4.51. Yeah. But again, I had put on weight. Yeah. Plus, I had hamstring injuries. That's another factor. I had a year where I really battled hamstring injuries. You start getting some scar tissue back there. I think that had an effect too on a little bit sore. But what I felt like that trade-off, that little bit of loss of speed was better because I was more physical, I was bigger, I was stronger. If I was having to fight somebody at the line, I felt just more solid. But there's an argument to be made. Like, well, was it a good trade-off or not? I don't know. I mean, I know that 165, I felt good playing at that weight. If I got too much above it, I felt more sluggish, slow. Like I couldn't move as well. I wasn't as fluid. So, and it's weird because athletes, they want to know this stuff. And you get a feel for it, too, internally. You can tell where you feel like you're moving best at, like at a certain weight.
For sure.
But I know I've had talked to strength coaches, talked to players. They want to know, well, at what weight am I going to slow down? Or how much muscle is too much muscle? We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting stuff. So maybe talk about how this study and Dr. Mann looking at momentum and saying more coaches need to look at this rather than just velocity or speed of movement. How is that tied into what you're doing?
Yeah, so essentially one interest of mine has always been, how do strength and speed complement each other, especially looking at it over multiple seasons. And then obviously gains in strength are a lot of times associated with gains in body weight. And so within a similar study that was published around the same time Dr. Mann's was published, we looked at a sample of, I think it was 16 or 17 college football players over the course of 3 collegiate seasons. And we were just kind of interested in tracking how...
So can we pull that up, this next paper we're getting into? So this one right here.
Yeah.
And so we're discussing this 2022 paper, like you said, Journal of Applied Sports Sciences. They just had published. So changes in lower body strength and linear speed performance in NCAA Division II collegiate football players across 3 competitive seasons. And, of course, this was a combination of you're the first author there, Dr. Herta here at KU, Dimitri, who we've had on before, Dr. Shabarkova, and then Dr. Fry. So, I'll let you get into explaining, the purpose of this hypothesis and kind of your method.
Yeah, so essentially we just retrospectively looked at how some of these measures change over the course of 3 seasons. We had their back squat, so lower body strength assessed through a 3RM in the back squat. And then we also had, I think we also had the hang clean in there. But we'll kind of narrow it in on the back squat here. But we looked at that through a absolute and a relative lens. So absolute strength just being the absolute amount of weight that they can move, and then relative just being their strength divided by their weight. So body weight being a ratio here. And then in addition to that, we monitored, how did their body weight change over those 3 years? And then also kind of our outcome variable, how did their linear speed, so their 40-yard dash time in this case, how did that change over the course of the 3 seasons?
Right. Okay. So I'm looking. Yeah, so you basically, just reading here directly from the paper, the primary purpose of the study was to observe and analyze changes in body weight, absolute and relative lower body strength, as well as linear speed and sprint momentum in those D2 athletes at the University of Central Missouri.
The primary outcomes there.
Across 3 competitive seasons. So coming in as freshmen, tracking them over 3 seasons. And then a second purpose, we aimed to investigate whether there were relationships between change scores in speed performance and change scores in body weight, as well as lower body strength between season 1 and season 3. And then you had a third aim, which was we were interested in whether or not baseline relative strength levels of the athletes in our sample impacted how much they improved or regressed in their 40-yard dash performance between season 1 and season 3. The idea was proposed that once athletes hit a certain level of lower body strength, further working on improving maximal strength may not optimally complement further improvements in speed performance. So again, now we're getting to that. And it's so true. I mean, if you go into any weight room and you look at freshmen, I mean, I can think when I was a freshman, because it depends how people develop. Some are still, they're developing at 18. They're a freshman. And you look at freshmen versus seniors, or even freshmen versus sophomores that have had a year of development.
That's probably the biggest jump there.
It's a big jump. I mean, the sophomores, you can tell. I mean, sophomores look different than the freshmen, and they are different. They're stronger, they're quicker, they're faster, they're more explosive. They're all that because they've had a whole nother year of training under that strength coach. So it's a big difference. So it's interesting, and this is what's been lacking in the research, is you did a longitudinal study tracking players over several years, 3 seasons versus just, a year or part of a season or in-season, off-season.
But interestingly enough, I mean, looking at picture 10 here, so table 2, if we look at some of these measures here, we can.
So we pull picture 10 up. There we go.
So if we look at some of these numbers here, we can see that essentially the similar results shake out that what was Dr. Mann what was he highlighting, that we found significant improvements in absolute strength and relative strength, significant increases in body weight over the course of those 3 seasons. However, 40-yard dash performance remained unchanged. And then,
so you'll notice everything highlighted there is significant, but the 40-yard dash, that's the only variable there on that left-hand column that, I don't have highlighted on this image.
And then interestingly enough, I think around the time that I was getting ready to submit this paper is when Dr. Mann's paper came out. So I decided to also calculate momentum. And interestingly enough, momentum also significantly improved from season 1 to season 3, likely influenced by those increases in body weight.
Right. So they put on mass as they went from season 1 to season 3, season 2 to season 3. And remember, mass is a component in that equation. So you put on mass, even if your velocity or speed would stay the same, your momentum's going to go up because mass times velocity equals momentum.
That speed component didn't change, but that mass component changed. So then the momentum changed significantly.
And I just think about that on the field. I can think of times where, it's one thing to get hit by a big guy that's moving slow. It's another thing to get hit by a guy that is that same weight, but they can move fast. I mean, this momentum component, oh my gosh. I mean, So if you can maintain your speed, but you increase your weight,
Yep.
yeah, you're going to have momentum. So you think of that in collisions. I mean, football's a collision sport. It's a lot different getting hit by a big guy that can move versus a big guy that cannot.
Sure.
And then I guess we will talk about the 40, even though it wasn't statistically significant. If you read down there at the bottom, the negative change sign in the 40-yard dash row indicates a decrease in completion time. So they improved their 40 from season 1 to season 3 and from season 2 to season 3, but it just wasn't.
Well, season 1 to season 2, they increased the time, which means decrease in performance.
Right.
But season 1 to season 3 and season 2 to season 3, they significantly decreased the time, so an improvement, but it was just not statistically significant.
Right.
And so, yeah, you kind of highlighted it earlier. Then we were just kind of interested in the change scores essentially. So were the correlations, so the relationships between some of those change scores in the either anthropometric or physical performance measures, and then the 40-yard dash. And interestingly, and this is going to be on picture 12, I think, so table 3 here, the only significant correlation that shook out, well, there was 2, but the primary here one was that the change score for body weight had a significant positive correlation with the change score for 40-yard dash, meaning those that changed more in body weight also changed more in 40-yard dash performance, but in the negative direction, so they got slower. So that was kind of interesting here from that perspective.
Well, this is going to be a hard sell to some coaches.
Yeah,
if it's like, because coaches are going to be like, we don't want our athletes getting slower, but then it's like, well, if they're a little bit slower but they're bigger, how is this going to translate to on-field performance?
Well, there was a near perfect correlation with body weight changes and changes in 40-yard dash momentum. So you can always tell the coach, for this position group, maybe momentum makes more sense than speed or velocity. And so
when I hear that, I just think immediately of defensive backs, coming up, breaking down, making a tackle. I could see that momentum. But then I think, well, what about for receivers? I think of receivers. Yeah, it's interesting, some of this, and it's like part of me thinks about it from the research perspective, and part of me thinks about it as a athlete or coach.
Yeah. It is interesting, but yeah, those were some of these correlations between this change scores. And then did you want to go to picture 14?
Well, let's go back, because we've skipped over some here. Let's go back to, we talked about, was there anything on that? I think we pretty much covered everything on picture 10 with what was significant. Let's go to picture 11. So talk about maybe each one of these, and you see it. We've got it pulled up on the screen now. So what are we looking at here? Just explain this again, what does this mean to a coach, an athlete, somebody that's not familiar with your research?
These are called spaghetti plots because I guess they look like spaghetti. But every line here on these plots is an individual athlete, so one of those 16. And the lines just kind of show how their performance or their body weight, whichever one we're looking at, changed over the course of the 3 seasons. So we have 2017, 2018, 2019. So how did that change? So those individual lines are the individual athletes, and then that red bolded line in the middle, that's the team or the group mean. So that's when we bunch them all together. How did the group change over time?
And if you don't remember what mean means, it's average. Yeah. So that's correct. The average, the red line for the group. Yeah.
So that's kind of just interesting to look at because for the most part, those changes are pretty similar. But then you have some outliers. I mean, it's kind of probably hard to see, but the 40-yard dash plot at the bottom left, kind of the third one from the top, like you see a pretty significant improvement actually from year 1 to year 2. And then again, a rise in the different directions. So they got faster and then they got slower.
And then you wonder, well, there's other factors in there. Were there injuries?
Yeah.
Were there? I mean, because there's all these other variables too.
Yeah.
I wonder if you looked at that specific athlete, like what it was.
Yeah, I can't recall specifically who that was, and obviously under IRB.
Or did they gain too much weight?
Yeah.
Did they? But yeah, maybe just talk about for each one, the line, the average for body weight for squat. I mean, you can see it visually, but
yeah. So obviously we see improvements or increases for body weight, relative squat, absolute squat, 40-yard dash, momentum. So they all increased, and then 40-yard dash actually increased, which means they got slower from season 1 to season 2, I think. So that's just a very slight increase, and then slight decrease, so a performance improvement over from year 2 to year 3, which, I mean, we saw in table 2, but that's just kind of visualized here in the plot.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So we're looking at the 40 from 2017 to 2018. The group average there is about a 4.6, and then they went up slightly, and
so
then
that's
back
that
down
freshman to sophomore year. Yeah.
So they could have put on some weight. But then you look at 40-yard dash momentum. Again, now we're talking mass times velocity. So it went up from season 2 to season 3.
Yeah.
So from 2018 to 2019. And of course, you look at their body weight. I mean, their body weight was going up across, 2017, 2018, 2019. You see the trend of that line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting to look at. Or the guy at the top right who had a crazy spike in absolute strength in the back squat.
Oh, wow.
Went from like a little over 200 kg, so that's a little over 400 pounds, to squatting like 500 plus pounds, almost 600 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's that maybe he had a pretty low training age, was already pretty strong, but yeah, just being exposed to a regular stimulus there.
And, one thing that needs to be looked at, too, when we say put on body weight, it's like, well, what's the composition of the weight?
Yeah.
Because I can think back to guys I played with. You'd have some guys that were putting on tons of muscle. Of course, muscle contracts, muscle produces force. Fat does not contract, and fat does not produce force. It's not going to do anything for you. But so you'd have some guys who's like, yeah, I'm putting on weight. I'm like, well, yeah, you're putting on fat, which isn't going to help you on the field probably, and you're putting on muscle. So what type of weight are you putting on?
Yeah, and that's
something I think that needs to be discerned.
And that's a limitation of the study, that those things weren't assessed. But obviously, you'd want to know the distribution of, what type of mass changed. Was it increases in weight due to lean muscle mass? Was it primarily fat? Like, those are certainly things to look into.
Right. Anything else you want to mention on there?
No, I think that's good for that.
All right. I think we're moving on to picture 13 here. We've got these scatter plots. You want to maybe talk about the scatter plots?
Picture 13, essentially just kind of coming back to what I was talking about with the change scores, highlights the relationship between those change scores. So the plot that's highlighted at the bottom left is probably the most interesting one to look at. We can see the slope of that line more steep than the other ones in a positive direction, meaning that the change score for 40-yard dash had a positive significant correlation with a change score in body weight, meaning that those athletes that got heavier also got slower. So that's kind of how the dependent and independent variable interact with each other there.
And see, that's where that body weight would be. The next question would be, all right, break those athletes that got heavier into two groups, right? You have the ones that, maybe it's a certain percentage of body fat.
Yeah.
You split them based on that body fat percentage or the amount of lean tissue they gained.
Yeah.
And then you look at those two groups, the ones that are above a certain threshold for lean tissue or body fat and the ones that are below, and then how that
for sure
body composition affects the change in their 40.
No, that would be super interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a visualization of some of the stuff that's in Table 3.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you want to go hit the tertiary aim of the study there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So essentially, bottom line, we saw when we took the whole group, so all 16 athletes, they all got stronger over time. They all got heavy over time. Their speed, however, remained unchanged. So one thing that we wanted to look at was, well, how does their baseline strength factor into this? So how does their strength prior to the start of season one, how does that influence how they develop over time? And interestingly enough, when we broke them into a high strength and a low strength group based on a median split analysis, so essentially what we did is we took the median of the group and we split them into a high and a low strength group, and then looked how that influenced things. And
let's define these groups.
Yeah,
okay,
go
so
for it.
A weak group in this study was considered players who could squat less than 2.31 times their own body weight during that season one, like their freshman year.
So weak might be the wrong term here, because 2.3 times your body is pretty strong.
Right.
But
it's just weak
lower,
for a term here in the study, right? Lower. It doesn't
yeah.
necessarily mean they're weak.
Yeah.
And then strong, the strong group, right, is the athletes or players that could squat greater than 2.31 times their own body weight during season one. Because you think about it, just to put this into terms, I mean, so if you have a 180-pound freshman coming in and they squat 2.31 times their body weight, that's like 415 pounds, right? If I'm doing my math correctly.
Yeah.
So that's not weak.
No,
I mean,
it's
if
not.
you're at that 2.31 mark, and there's not a lot of freshmen that are going to be able to probably squat that much, but
For sure.
this is just how you divided it for the study.
But
so then, I'll let you take over
Yeah,
from here. So kind of what does this all mean?
in my opinion, that tertiary aim here is kind of the most interesting one, because essentially then when we compared those groups, we saw that those players that squatted below 2.31 times their body weight, so they were in the low strength group during season one, they experienced significantly larger improvements in 40-yard dash performance between season one and season three compared to the strong group. So you could almost make an argument that for them, getting stronger also helped them get faster.
For the weak group.
Whereas the strong group, adding additional strength, not necessarily made them also faster.
Right. So it's like there's this strength threshold where it's like, okay, by trying to gain more strength, at some point there's a point of diminishing returns, a ceiling effect.
Yeah,
right?
Like how strong is strong enough, essentially, with regards to speed development here.
And 2.31, that's interesting because I have, and this kind of ties in, maybe we can talk a little bit about this. So Matt Rea, who's the performance director for the New Orleans Saints, he has on his LinkedIn, he came out with this statement. Now, this was several years ago, but he found a threshold of 1.7.
Yeah.
So an athlete that can squat 1.7 times their body weight, it appears that once they can squat more than 1.7 times their body weight, it doesn't have any value as far as increasing their speed.
Yeah.
That was his findings.
Yeah.
Any comments on?
Yeah, so that's a little bit lower. My head immediately goes to the level of player that we're looking at. Not saying Division II players are not good athletes, but for them, changes in physical performance might make a bigger dent in the overall picture than for someone. I'm not sure Matt Rea was with Alabama before. I don't know if that was Alabama data that he was referring to, but even if it's the University of Indiana and Division I players,
right,
those are naturally already more gifted and probably naturally already faster, to where for someone that is less gifted from a physical standpoint, for them, increasing their strength might make a bigger impact as far as their speed goes compared to someone that is just naturally more gifted from a speed perspective. So that's one place where my head goes to.
Now, he tracked for 4 years strength, power, and speed among high school and college football players. So that's, that should really be, in my opinion, it should be divided out. I mean, and then you really should even divide, like you said, the college athletes into, there's a big difference between D3, D2, and D1.
Yeah.
I mean, so you could almost divide the college and subdivide it out, and then high school, that should be separate. But his statement is, thus for high school and collegiate football players, a dual focus on strength and power until the athlete achieves 1.7 times body weight in the squat is appropriate. I could agree with that.
I could agree with that, but I'd also argue that most college freshmen come in already squatting 1.7 times their body weight, unless you are an offensive or a defensive lineman. Yeah. Squatting 1.7 times their body weight is not that much, but I can also see where he's coming from, and I could definitely agree with that.
Right. And then he says above his threshold is 1.7. Above that, a more substantial focus on power improvement will have a greater impact on speed development. So again, what is power? That's force times velocity. So again, focusing on not only like brute strength and max strength, but the ability to move your body and move loads fast, the velocity component.
Yeah.
And, that's where I think about, and we talk about it in my undergrad classes. I know you're obviously familiar with it, but the force velocity curve.
Yeah,
it's like
for sure.
A good strength coach, there's going to be times where you're training at the high force end of that curve, where you're moving heavier loads, higher percentages of your 1 rep max. Obviously, by default, those heavier loads, you will move more slowly. But then you need to work on the other end of that curve, the velocity component, where it's lighter loads, but you're moving them very rapidly. You're working on sprinting and plyometrics, rate of force development, power and explosiveness, and you kind of train all along that curve to develop a well-rounded athlete, especially in sports where power, speed, force, that's all part of football. So
no, that's interesting.
All right, so where are we at here? We kind of got out talking about Matt's work, which is really interesting. Your threshold is a little higher.
Yeah, and my sample is also smaller. So taking it with a grain of salt like that. That's the thing with these thresholds. There's a very good chance that those thresholds are applicable to this sample. But if you take a different sport, a different level of play, other things, that threshold might look very different.
Yeah, and I don't know what his sample size was either, but
over 4 years. I mean, he's probably
got
more.
So
than
that's going to change the data with a bigger sample size. All right, so I think we're moving on then to where are we at? This last figure.
Yeah, so that's essentially also just like a representation of that finding that we just highlighted. So a box plot comparing the strong and the weak group. On the y-axis, we have their change score from season 1 to season 3 as far as linear speed goes, so 40-yard dash performance. Here, again, a lower number, meaning they got faster, higher number.
But momentum.
What's that?
Momentum. Yeah.
Oh, 40-yard dash. I think that should not say momentum. Maybe that's a typo there. Is there another one for 40-yard dash, or is that the only one in there?
That is the one I'm looking at. Let's see. Which study is that? That would be, right here, 40-yard dash. Momentum.
That might be a typo. Yeah.
We found an error.
Yeah.
Okay, so what should the y-axis say?
It should say the same thing, but without momentum.
Okay, so
just 40-yard dash change score. Actually,
which would not be in kilogram meters per second. It would just be in meters per second.
Yeah.
Did I just find a mistake in your publication? Okay.
Let me see the paper real quick.
Okay,
Is there two? Is that the only box plot that's in there?
That's literally the one. Yeah, that was the one that I found in the study. Interesting.
Well, you might have found a mistake, but I think that should be 40-yard dash performance.
Well, I'll let you explain it how you want to explain it.
Essentially, showing what's in table 4, with change score being on the y-axis, the weak group got significantly faster compared to the weak group got significantly faster compared to the already strong group.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, go back to, so this graph right here, this box plot is basically representing picture 14. So can you go back to picture 14? Having you jump all around. This is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is really, I think out of all the tables, this is the one coaches, athletes they're gonna. This is the meat and potatoes, so to speak. Is if you're coming in weak as a freshman, you need to build some foundational strength and get stronger, and that's going to help increase or decrease your 40 time. Right? It's going to improve your 40. But then you get to this certain threshold, whether it's 1.7 as identified by Matt Rea, or in your case 2.31. There's going to be this certain threshold where any additional gains in strength of the lower extremity, like back squat strength, isn't going to do much to improve your 40 time. Yeah. Okay, so then what would you recommend with training then at that point?
I mean, we could do similar to what was Matt saying. Like if that is the threshold that we're going off of, we would probably train an athlete with the goal of strength development in mind until they hit that threshold of 2.31. And then once they hit that threshold, we'd probably shift our focus towards some other avenues such as power development, rate of force development, sprint technique, other things that we think could influence speed performance.
Right. It's a lot of plyometrics, a lot of working on acceleration. Yeah. Maybe it's deceleration training, right? Change of direction, all these other, and it's funny, it reminds me like when I had Coach Potson and we talked about some of the techniques he uses to develop speed in his athletes, and he works with everything from youth to high school to college and pro. And the example he had mentioned, you have somebody that's naturally really fast, like the fastest guy in the NFL, Tyreek Hill, and he's like, it was just changing which foot he had in front coming off the line, and that made a couple hundredths of a second difference, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're an athlete on the field, that could make the difference between you being open by half a yard and being covered as a receiver. So
for sure,
those little tweaks, and you know how it is, anytime the higher the level of athlete that you're working with, and I can think back to when I was a strength coach, it's just making minor adjustments. I mean, they already have a good base of training. I really enjoyed working with youth because, number one, they wanted to listen to you. They were like sponges, and you could work on a lot of things, with youth. But
for sure.
All right. Let's see. Where are we at? So I guess kind of just summarizing this last study, really interesting stuff. Conclusions that you would draw from the research, any more speculation you want to do about what your results may indicate, and then just, again, practical applications. What are the practical applications for coaches, players, scouts, other personnel associated with collegiate or professional football teams?
I think practical applications, just having an understanding of these common trends, how does body weight and strength and speed change over the course of a collegiate career? And then how could we use that information to make informed decisions with regards to training? And then obviously that threshold that we identified here, for example, that's not an end-all be-all threshold. So it'll need further research, especially longitudinal research, to kind of solidify the hypothesis that we make here. And especially, to my understanding, there's no studies out there to where we would then train an athlete until they hit that threshold and then shift focus and see how that shift in focus, we'd have one group that continues with max strength, and then we'd have one group that focuses on power or rate of force development. But obviously, if you know this more than anyone else, like in most sporting settings, we can't have a control group, things like that. Yeah. But that would be ideal to investigate some of these propositions that we're making here.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because just thinking at your results and conclusions, it's like just summarizing it. From season 1 to season 3, you're going to see an increase in body weight. You may see in weaker individuals, right? They get stronger, they increase their 40. But then even if they do increase body weight, I think this is important for coaches, and it depends on what the coaches want, right? You may see 40-yard dash times not improve once they hit a certain body weight, a certain strength level, but they may be playing with more momentum on the field, right? I would like to see that. Maybe one of the on-field performance measures you could look at, like if a player's playing with more momentum, I think, I just go to linebackers, defensive backs, safeties that are going to be bringing that momentum into a tackle. Is that going to help them maybe be more effective at tackling? Maybe they don't miss as many tackles because they're bringing more momentum into the tackle, more likely to get the ball carried to the ground. Whereas maybe on offense, it's like, well, we don't want this receiver getting too big, too bulky, losing their speed. Maybe they're less concerned about the receiver having momentum. They just want them agile, getting open quick, all of that. But I think about for certain positions, safeties, corners, linebackers, defensive ends, I want them bringing that momentum.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, and I could go on a whole tangent about how bad tackling has got at the college level in NFL. And I know some of this is a player safety thing. But, I mean, does that make sense to you?
No, it does. And it's with momentum having that velocity and that mass component, if you're a defender at the offensive play, once you've made contact, like that momentum is definitely going to help you, I feel like, make that tackle.
For sure.
However, if you gain too much weight and lose speed and you don't get to the offensive player fast enough, then that momentum's not going to help you.
Right.
So it's kind of that combination of both.
Oh, yeah. Can't you just have the best of both worlds, right? It's just like a lot of things in life, it's a trade-off, right?
It's a trade-off, exactly.
There's a trade-off there, and it's just finding, you got this bell-shaped curve right in the middle, that sweet spot, finding the sweet spot.
Where do they complement each other the best? Yeah.
All right. So we'll move on to question 9 here. So you currently have a paper now in review with the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research titled Strength and Power Thresholds to Identify High and Low Linear Sprint Speed Performers in Collegiate American Football Players. And like I said, hopefully this is going to get published, and you've done some revisions. Can you briefly describe kind of just the general purpose of that study and the findings there? Yeah,
just kind of organically out of, what developed with those findings of the previous study that we highlighted here. We were kind of interested, can we identify some of those thresholds that we might use as actionable targets in training? So essentially what we did, we had a much larger database because we weren't worried about tracking performance over time. So we just I think we ended up with a sample of almost like 200 or 300 players.
Great. Larger sample size, always better, yeah.
And then we broke them essentially into 2 groups just because we know that, strength is correlated with body mass. So just to kind of tease that out a little bit, we broke them up into
But not body composition,
body composition, body mass. Okay. Yeah, right. So we put one group, everyone that was, I think, heavier than 220, 225 pounds. That was just the median of the sample. And then everyone that was below 220 was in the light group. And then within that group, we broke them again into a high and a low speed group based on how fast they were in the 40-yard dash. And then that's where it gets a little bit tricky from a statistical standpoint. But what we used was receiver operator curves, which essentially just aim to look at the ability to correctly classify athletes into being in a certain group, so whether that's high or low speed group. And so we had our dependent variable. We'll come back to our dependent variable here. So our outcome was, can we classify them into being either in the high or low strength group? So that's our outcome. And then our independent variable was relative strength within the squat and the hang clean. So that was our dependent variable. And so these receiver operator curves do their thing. They show you, okay, what's the likelihood of those athletes based on their strength numbers being classified in either the high or the low group. And then it also gives you a threshold, which is essentially like that sweet spot at which we can maximize the possibility of classifying them correctly into one of those 2 groups. So more of a challenge from a statistical standpoint, but it's the only way to kind of establish some of those thresholds.
What were you seeing as far as findings? Anything interesting there?
Yeah, I'm not going to throw out specific numbers since it hasn't been published, but I will say that it's not so far off from what we found with regards to the study that we previously highlighted.
Okay, so it's lining up with
lining up.
Research.
It's dependent on which group, heavy versus light, and then future research should obviously look at different position groups because it's probably going to differ. But if you're interested in, I'll just kind of that LinkedIn article because that's out there already. So there's a LinkedIn article that I wrote kind of as a follow up to the previous study that we talked about. that goes a little bit into discussing that what we're doing right now with identifying those thresholds. So that might be something to look at before that other study that we're talking about right now is getting out there. But yeah, essentially, do have to highlight that this is nothing longitudinal, right? We're just using the data to potentially identify those thresholds, but then future research is definitely warranted, like we talked about earlier, to see if those thresholds are any good. So again, we'd want to train an athlete up to that threshold that we've identified, and then either continue training them for maximal strength or shift focus towards something else like power or rate of force development, and see how that essentially changes their development from a speed perspective.
Yeah. And that's kind of getting into the next random question, is, how strong is strong enough? So it looks like, depending on the study, anywhere from, Ray is going to say 1.7, you're going to say 2.31.
Closer to 2.31.
Somewhere in that range. That's anything, any lower extremity strength above that, you're not gaining much as far as your speed.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of the crux of it.
Yeah. This is just kind of getting into some training methods, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just picking your brain here, what training methodologies would you feel are most beneficial in improving on-field success? And maybe you compare like weak versus strong athletes.
Yeah.
Should strength and conditioning coaches, what should they focus on when working with football players?
Yeah, obviously that kind of depends on the nature of the position group. Kind of like that first step that we talked about earlier, what are those metrics that are correlated with on-field success? And then honestly, just kind of reverse engineering from those demands. If we see that a broad jump seems to be correlated with performance for the wide receiver and tight end group, then horizontal force production.
Right. You have a receiver freshman, they got a poor broad jump, they only jump 6 foot or 7 foot. It's like, that's not good. So we're gonna have to work on that. Yeah, like you said, that horizontal force production and projection.
And that doesn't mean that we just focus on that, kind of like that vertical integration approach that we like to use in strength and conditioning. We work on all of those qualities year round, whether that's strength, power, speed, rate of force development. They all get sprinkled in at all points throughout the year, but the emphasis might change. And so, based on the need and what we found from reverse engineering, from the demands of the position or the sport, that might be a certain emphasis. Like we said, if we have an athlete that's under that strength threshold, the emphasis might be maximal strength development until they get to that threshold. And then once they hit that threshold, we might shift gears and focus on horizontal power, vertical power, rate of force development, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. What about muscle mass? So we know, a freshman comes in, they start lifting. They're obviously, you always gain strength before size. A lot of that's due to neurological adaptations, increased ability to recruit the motor units you need to perform a task. We could get into rate coding, motor unit firing rate, all that stuff. So you see these neurological adaptations first. Then after, 6, 8, 12 weeks, you really start seeing muscle mass increase in somebody that's just starting out strength training. Well, some athletes, and I've had strength coaches, they're like, you're putting on too much muscle. Like, you got to tone it down a bit. Maybe, and that's why, maybe the volume in the training program is too high. Yeah. It's like, we don't want you to be a bodybuilder if you're a collegiate or professional football player, right? So you shouldn't be turning into a bodybuilder. Yet you do need some muscle, right? Mm-hmm. Muscle produces force. Larger muscle fibers are going to produce more force. Yeah. And the fibers get larger as a result of strength training. Yeah. So that's all tied in. Yeah. But, can a football player become too muscular?
I would argue yes, but only if it negatively impacts the outcome, which is performing on the field.
Right.
And so, like you said, force production is highly dependent on muscle cross-sectional area. And so if we know that an athlete we have a DB and we saw that lower body strength seems to correlate with their success on the field, then yeah, we probably, just as a side effect of that training program, will experience some increases in muscle cross-sectional area. But as long as it doesn't negatively influence their on-field success, then I think that kind of depends,
Yeah, if it's affecting running form, hip mobility, shoulder mobility, I mean, things like that, then it could be too much muscle, could be negative. And then it's like, well, maybe you drop the volume, but you still keep the load high, so you maintain or increase strength. But that again, that's where the strength coach, like you said, has to reverse engineer it and look at each individual athlete and tailor the approach to that athlete and what that athlete needs. And that's where it's tough with football. You're working with so many players across multiple positions, and you can't just use this cookie cutter approach. But it reminds me of a guy I remember when I was in junior college, we called Tank, and he looked like a bodybuilder. I mean, he was a linebacker, built, ripped, huge, big. I mean, he was just massive. But I'll never forget, we were doing overhead squats one day, right? So you got the bar overhead behind you. And he couldn't get in that position. He could not get the bar just slightly behind his head over him.
Struggle taking his shirt off in the locker room.
Right, he couldn't maintain balance. He could not overhead squat the bar. And I remember our strength coach would lose it with him. Because, number one, he didn't have the shoulder mobility. He didn't have good hip mobility. I mean, he was just a mass of muscle. But he wasn't very efficient. He didn't move fluid on the field. He was just a rock of muscle. So he couldn't get into those positions. And it was funny because he could back squat a ton, but doing that overhead squat, and we would do overhead walking lunges, he couldn't get that bar back. He couldn't do snatches and anything overhead. He was struggling. And a lot of unilateral stuff. And so it would just drive our strength and conditioning coach crazy. But,
I can see that.
Tank was a big dude. He was built, but I think it. I don't have numbers, obviously, but just anecdotally, you can just look at somebody and see how they're moving. And it's like, something's got to change. Like, we want to keep that strength on you, but maybe if you lost a little muscle mass and were more mobile.
Yeah, I can definitely, I'd agree with that.
That would be beneficial, right?
Yeah.
Might translate to better on-field performance.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else you want to add? I know maybe talk about, let's just end it with future directions. What would you like to look at? Is there anything where you're just like, man, I really want to look at this down the road? It would really be interesting. I know you're doing some work on looking at deceleration. I was just in the lab the other day and looking at deceleration training. And
I mean, I have those other two research buckets, right? That neuromuscular performance monitoring and the decel, just kind of in line with what we were talking about today, even though at the moment that's not my primary research focus, but I think it ties in with what we were talking about today. And I've touched on this earlier. I mean, in a perfect world, we would grab a bunch of athletes with different strength thresholds or different strength levels, train them up to one of those thresholds that we identify, and then we'd have one group that keeps working on maximal strength, and then we have one group that works on power, and then we just kind of track how their speed changes over time. So that's kind of like the ideal scenario. It's tough because you can't walk up to the strength coach and be like, hey, I need a control and a intervention group. And that's just not how it works in the applied world, but just in line with what we were talking about today, that would be the ideal study in my eyes.
It's really cool at UCM that the coaches out there were all in on this, doing your studies, because it depends on the university, depends on the coaching staff. They get very protective of their athletes that you were allowed to.
The coaching staff has drastically changed. I know back then when I was there, this was with Coach Jim Svoboda, who was last season was the offensive coordinator at Tulane, which they obviously had a very, very, very good season offensively. And so he definitely knows what he's doing. But he was very bought into this kind of stuff. And so before any of this was submitted to a journal or published or anything like that, like there was talks with the coaches. These numbers were presented to the coaches because first and foremost, we wanted to enhance their off-season testing battery. We wanted to enhance, their scoring system. So coming back to the first study that we've highlighted, that total score of athleticism, like that study actually led to the coaching staff changing up their off-season testing procedures and evaluation of incoming athletes So that's the goal we have, right? As applied sports scientists, we definitely want to push research out and advance the field. But if it's not influencing the coach or the athlete, it's not really doing its job.
Yeah, that's why sports scientists are here, right?
Yeah.
To benefit coaches and athletes. And that's the thing, is just bridging that gap between what's being done in the lab, you working in the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab, and then coaches and athletes benefiting from your research. And then sometimes it works the other way. Like Dr. Fry and I have talked about, it's sometimes the coaches can be ahead of the curve and ahead of the research, and they've been doing it for years, but then you take some of that data and that information and what the coaches are doing, and you basically are validating it in the lab.
Reinforces it.
This can be a two-way bridge, right?
Yeah.
Between coaches, athletes, and researchers, where, working together and being kind of an interdisciplinary approach is just going to benefit everybody and just further the field and further enhance athletic development.
For sure.
So
awesome.
Well, appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dr. Taylor. It was my pleasure.
So how can people contact you if they have questions about your research?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different options, I think. I'm on most social media platforms as far as research and kind of the professional avenue goes. Either LinkedIn or Twitter probably work the best. Not sure. I think my Twitter handle is Nico Philipp 10, and then Nico Philipp on LinkedIn. And then, of course, my KU email would work as well. That would be nicophilipp@ku.edu.
And it's Philipp, again, Philipp.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So it's 2 P's, 1 L, not 2 L's, 1 P. So some people don't want people to mess that up.
Yep.
And if you have questions for me about the KU Exercise Science program, send an email to jtaylor@ku.edu, or you can call me at 913-897-8516. Thanks for watching this special sports science edition of Fitness Facts.